Sarah Benwell, the editor of fundoperator.com. I'm here with Evan Fire, Chief Operating Officer at Pzena Investment Management. Evan is speaking at the Fund Operator North America Virtual Summit on the 28th of September. Ahead of that, we wanted to catch up with him to get a little flavour of what he'll be discussing on the day. Hi, Evan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So my first question is, how can fund operators get the right balance between insourcing and outsourcing?
You know, I think everyone's different. And at the end of the day, the decision to insource versus outsource really comes down to each specific problem you're trying to solve for. And, you know, in some instances, you can solve it internally. And in some other instances, you're going to want to go outside your walls and find someone to help you with whatever it is you're working on. I know at Pzena Investment Management, that's how we approach it. And, you know, I think that works the best for those that are looking to make that kind of decision.
Great, thank you. And when it comes to sort of innovation, is that easier to do internally, do you find, or is that something where you're more likely to want to work with external providers?
You know, it's interesting. I think it still goes back to that same case-by-case analysis. Sometimes you're going to have the internal expertise, and sometimes you're going to need to seek out the expertise of others. You know, I think over time, if you're truly dedicated to innovation, one of the core pillars of your operating model should be focused on developing your people. Because if you can upskill your team, then innovation internally becomes much easier. And you know, when you work with the right external provider, you're also organically learning from them as you work on whatever project it is. So I think, you know, I think there's a healthy mix of both, but I think one of the key focal points has to be upskilling your team if you want to focus on innovation.
That makes perfect sense to me. So for fund operators that are outsourcing, how can they make sure that they've still got the kind of right knowledge and expertise internally if they're you know, farming a lot of stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, that gets tricky because if you're constantly relying on an external party to do something, the likelihood that your team is going to be able to absorb that knowledge and know how to function if it were to move internal becomes hard. And I think that's why when you really decide what you're going to use insourcing for versus what you're going to use outsourcing for, you really need to make sure you are thoughtful about how you make those decisions. You got to choose the right partners, and hopefully then you can kind of divide and conquer.
Great. And another thing that we're hearing from a lot of people is that there's a lot of budget squeezing going on at the moment. So with that kind of downward pressure on costs, are you seeing more people being pushed to outsourcing, or is the opposite happening? How's that playing out?
You know, it's interesting. You can debate the cost, I guess, total cost of ownership of doing it internal versus outsourcing. And you know, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all approach, because sometimes outsourcing will be more expensive than doing it internally. Like, I know for us in particular, we run a very efficient operations. We've done peer surveys, and we know that kind of our cost to produce, so to speak, is quite low. And that's just because of efficiencies and straight-through process that we've been able to kind of put in place over the years that if we were to outsource something, we'd probably spend more than doing it internally. So I think you have to just really do your due diligence, figure out what the most appropriate way to approach something is. And I don't think it's as simple as outsourcing is cheaper. I don't think that's the case.
That makes sense. And then you mentioned earlier, you know, finding the right partners. When it comes to innovation specifically, how can you make sure that you're picking the right external providers or partners to work with to kind of foster that innovation?
Yeah, you know, that's a really important point, because we've always had a philosophy that you don't want to just hire a vendor. You don't want to cut someone a check for something they do. You really want to build a relationship, because at the end of the day, especially if you're talking about innovating, usually you've got to be shoulder to shoulder working on whatever solution it is in a very together and collaborative kind of methodology. And really making sure you scour your peer network, understand kind of what's working and what's not when you're looking at solutions. If you can find people that have done it before you and you trust their opinions, you usually can get pointed in the right direction. But using your peer network, doing proper due diligence, and thinking about it as a partnership and not as just a third-party vendor that you hire. I think those are some of the key points that I would make.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and I can't wait to hear more from you at the conference in September.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you then.